Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Let me see if we're hitting the Zoom. Test 1, 2. I see it. Beautiful.
Is this working? Can you hear? Hi, everyone. Sorry. Gillard? No. I'm trying to get everyone to sit down. Excuse me, everyone. Hi. Hello. Hello. Could I have your attention? Okay, if you could take a seat, because there's lots of people waiting to come in, and we just want to know how many seats we've got. So if you could take your seats, unless you're a speaker, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And you're one of our speakers, are you? That's great.
How does that?
Just sit wherever you like. Yeah, wherever you like. Yeah, perfect. Yes. No, just come and take a seat. That's fine. I'm over the system now. That's great. Thank you very much. And sorry about the rather convoluted system. We need some tech to help us. There are some seats at the front here as well, if you want to come on down. Okay. There's a few seats left at the front. Hi, hey. Hi. Come and take a seat. I'm going to sit here. Jem, what I haven't done is give these out. Should I announce this and just give them out to everyone who's here? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and if you can't get a seat, God, it's busy. Okay, how are we doing? Is that everyone in? There's a few seats left. There's a seat with a couple of cups on it. Okay, yes, I will. Thank you. Okay, 3:30. Phew. Okay, well, thank you very, very much for your patience. I've never been at a nature event where there's been so many ways of trying to keep people out of the room. So just bear with us. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Lucy Armand and I'm the chair of the Nature for Climate Coalition. So we've been hosting the Nature Positive Hub along with many of our partners. So we've got 3 days of lots of cool nature programming. So very nice of you all to be here. It would be fair to say this was by far the most oversubscribed event. So I feel like we're with the cool kids, which is good. Again, that doesn't happen often. If you've been in 20 years of forest and climate, it's not the cool kids who show up. So thank you very much for coming and making our Nature Positive Hub sexy. It's great. Yeah, so we had 450 registrations for this event, which I think says a lot about the amount of energy that there is in nature tech at the moment. So really excited about our speakers today who are going to talk to us about it. And also special thank you to our partners, the MRV Collective. So to Gilad, Raviv and the team, thank you. We'll be hearing from Gilad later, and many of you I know are all part of the MRV Collective as well. So why are we here? It's not an existential question. It's around, do you all know why we're here in terms of the definition of nature tech? I imagine every one of us has a slightly different understanding of what nature tech currently means, what nature tech could mean. At Nature for Climate, we started very much with an original, quite a tight definition of what nature tech was, because it was clearly linked to our mission around promoting nature-based solutions. So when we first started using the term nature tech, we had quite a narrow definition, which was around tech that basically enables, accelerates, scales up nature-based solutions. Since that, we've broadened the definition. We've started working with a much bigger ecosystem of actors. And you could have a very, very broad definition of nature tech, which would basically be all tech that's good for nature, in which case you would likely put in all climate tech or food production tech, that anything ultimately that's going to be good for nature. I think, and maybe that's where we'll get to. But for the purposes of today, I think we're talking about tech basically that is all the different types of tech that's addressing a wide range of environmental challenges, such as habitat destruction, deforestation, soil degradation, water pollution, species loss, climate change, but that kind of range of tech. And Nature for Climate's produced a couple of reports already on nature tech, an initial paper which laid out the concept, and then a report that we did with partners Capital for Climate, who Tony might be in the room, last year, which was more of a kind of analysis of the market size. And then this year we're doing a third report that will be out in October, which we're partnering with the MRV Collective and VC company Serena, and that's going to look at the size of the market, but also go a little bit deeper into categorizing the stage of investment within the market. So early stage investment, late stage, a lot more numbers in it, and a whole load of trends, a lot of which we've crowdsourced from you guys. So thank you for anyone who's been helping with that report production. If all goes to plan, it will be out in October. Jen, that's for you. And so we're just going to not talk about the numbers today, but give you a sneak preview of some of the top line trends we're seeing in that report. Before I hand over to our wonderful speakers, who I think will hopefully maybe talk about some of those trends in a little bit more detail. So first of all, there's 5 trends, and they're really around the regulations that are coming on disclosure that will drive a need for value chain transparency, monitoring and modeling. So that incoming wave of regulation, which nature tech can support. Secondly, and relatedly, I think we've heard a lot about the shift towards nature positive strategies for corporates and the finance sector. I've heard a lot about TNFD, it's launching kind of now, I think. So that nature positive activity is driving a lot of this demand for tech. Thirdly, advances in MRV. We're going to hear a lot about that today, so I won't go into detail. Fourth, innovation from the global south. So there we see that innovators are actively responding and catering to the needs of local smallholders in a way that possibly could pose some risk to incumbents, but there's a lot of innovation happening in the global south. And finally, and not surprisingly, the food and ag is by far receiving the largest share of funding in this market at the moment. So before we go to our speakers, I just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors today. So we have 5 sponsors in the room, some of whom we probably tried not to let in, so apologies for that. So big thank you to SustainCert, to LandLife, Nature Metrics, Terraformation, and One Small Planet. So a very big thank you to you guys. 2 last things in the bun fight to get in. If I didn't give you one of these, come and get one at the end, because this is the networking reception voucher. So you definitely want one of those. And then lastly, to our speakers, when Jen produces a yellow card and a red card, it's not about bad language, it's about timing. So a yellow card means 2 more minutes, and a red card means you're out of time. So anyway, I am now going to hand over to Shaila Raghav, the founder and CEO of CO2, timec2.com, to be our wonderful moderator.
Y'all hear me? Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's so lovely to be with you all. I'm Shaila Raghav. I'm a co-founder at TimeCO2, which is the climate action division of Time, the media company, all about telling positive, inspiring stories to really convert the awareness and the information that Time has reported on for over 100 years into agency, empowerment, and into action. I'm so excited to be part of this conversation to take us through some insights that we'll learn about nature tech. Unfortunately, in the past, I've very much heard nature versus tech. So is it about nature-based solutions or technological solutions? How can they coexist? I think what's really exciting about what we're going to discuss today is that there is a space in which they can be combined and that we can actually achieve more if we leverage everything that we can harness from nature together with everything that our innovation, that our creativity can spark when it comes to technology. So Lucy already went over all of the different levers of nature tech. But I think there's just so many different dimensions of how that shows up in our work. And that I think is manifested by all of you here. How many of you are developers of nature tech, or you would consider yourself a developer of a technology that is being deployed towards nature? Let's just see a show of hands. Great. So a lot of innovators and solutionists here. How many of you are part of a business that are potentially looking to integrate nature tech or possibly optimize some of your operations or your work through nature tech? All right, great. So we've got quite a bit from the private sector as well. And how many of you are practitioners, right? Nature defenders, those on the ground that are trying to increase confidence in nature-based solutions through technology? Great. Okay, good. So I see we have a good spread across sectors. And so my appeal and my ask to all of our speakers today is, as you're delivering your remarks, see if you can relate your take-home message to one of these stakeholder groups. What can those that are here in the room today take away from what you've learned in the trenches, what you're developing? Is your ask for them to deploy your technology? Do you need more data? Do you need the world to hear about what you're doing? How can we all support each other in this cause? So that's my ask to all of you. And I look forward to wrapping up once we hear from everybody on our panel today. And so luckily, Jen is going to be keeping time. So I'll be guiding us through our session here today. We have quite a few speakers. So really encourage you all to stay attentive to everything that they're going to say. And just for your awareness, if you've got burning questions, save them for the end. We'll have about 20 minutes for a moderated conversation towards the end. So now I am delighted and honored to introduce our first speaker, who is Siddharth Srikanth, who is an investor and generally works on industrial and natural climate solutions together at Just Climate, and is also an author of a widely popular book that just came out a few months ago. So Siddharth, well, maybe widely popular to those of us in this room, and the rest of the world needs to read your book. But over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I am here with these two hats on. So on one hand, the book journey for me was amazing because many of you contributed to this book. Many of you are in it. And I loved traveling the world, hearing stories of case studies on the ground, seeing how nature tech was being applied. I had an entire section dedicated to nature tech. Loved getting to know that space. And so on one hand, I ended up becoming a bit of a cheerleader for these projects and individuals who are working on this, working incredibly hard, and I think doing generally really, really good work. But I am here with my investor hat on. And it's my job, I think, in this conversation to tell you what we're struggling with and what we, I think, need to see for this market to really scale. And so on one hand, I love all of the work you do. On the other, I've been grappling with two questions, and I'll run through both of them. I think the first for us is what the capital stack for nature tech looks like. Now, in the climate tech space, this conversation has been going on for the last several years as companies have realized that just pure venture capital funding doesn't quite work for asset-heavy sectors where there is technology risk, there's scale-up and system integration risk, and there's, of course, the kind of standard commercial risk that goes with it. These are capital-intensive businesses, so the climate tech world's been having that conversation. I think with nature, we probably do have to look at ourselves and say, these case studies are wonderful. To get them to scale, what will we need to see and what types of capital will we need to see? And I'd like to start at the very basis of many of these systems, which is the land steward or landowner. Now, real assets investing, I'm not sure if there are any real assets investors in the room. They're incredibly, incredibly important to all of this. Now, what that really means is owning and typically operating land, agricultural land or forest land, or even conservation and carbon projects. But ultimately, who has ownership or stewardship of the land is fundamental. And involving real assets investors in this conversation will be fundamental to scaling up some of the technologies that we see and would like to see scale. This isn't, I think, if you look at the whole of nature tech, VC alone won't solve it, but we do have some exciting new venture capitalists looking at this space. We've got Tom and Kevin at Super Organism. We've got a number of other generalist VCs as well as climate tech VCs who've made interesting investments in this space. Many of the companies on this panel are venture backed. I think that's a good thing, because I think VCs bring some really important strengths to this space. They push for scale. They ask companies to enter new markets, to commercialize quickly and early, to find product market fit. Those are all really good things. But I do think we have to ask ourselves the hard question of, as an asset class, is this venture backable? My working hypothesis is some of it is, some of it isn't. And so, we have these two ends of the spectrum, real assets investors who own land and VCs who can help scale business models on top of it. I do think the other bits of the capital stack need to emerge as well. So, there's not really growth equity investors in nature. And that's fine because the system's early. And we do have growth equity investors in agriculture, which is incredibly important for nature. Lucy, I enjoyed your broader definition of nature tech. I think that's how we see it at Just Climate. This is about agriculture, the food system, as well as conservation and restoration and carbon removal and so on. And we need to involve growth equity investors who've learned a lot and have scars. So that's my final pitch. And then finally, I think we do need this to eventually become project financeable. And that will involve attracting debt capital that currently does not flow into any of these business models. And so that's what we're grappling with. How can we're building a very flexible strategy, but over time, I think we will need lots and lots of investors with flexible capital to enter the space. That's what we've been grappling with. The second piece I want to ask, and this is actually maybe a question to the whole panel, is, what product market fit looks like in nature tech? Because I don't think we have a clear playbook for what this looks like, which is why investors sometimes struggle. When we look at a business model, we're not quite sure whether this is traction or if it's philanthropic money flowing in, right? And because these business models are early and it's not clear if these are experiments or if there's a real market emerging. And two things I've noticed have really helped. One, and I'm going to shout out to Kat, Naturemetrics is an example of a company that is building a beachhead market in a compliance market and is then able to layer on lots of other additional revenue streams. We're seeing that across the board. I think it's really interesting to see how regulations, both straight policy for domestic reasons, things like TNFD, as well as self-regulation from companies, are then creating business models where real money is flowing into something today, and we can take that money and put it into something nature positive. I think that's what Naturemetrics, and a number of you actually are working in a very similar mindset. I think it's important to look at how we leverage real existing markets and then layer on top of that with voluntary commitments and so on. And the other piece around product market fit, which we talked about in the earlier panel, is buyers. Right? At the end of the day, if you're selling an environmental service, which I deeply believe in, I think we should value these services, someone needs to buy it. And ideally, those buyers should be doing it from a place of we need to buy it. I mean, there's this Japanese framework of the 7 whys. My time's out, but I think it's always good to ask why. Why are buyers buying it? And the first why might be they care about nature. When we get to the second and third and fourth why, you might realize buy motivations are not particularly deep, and so they could go away, and that presents risk to investors. Or you can find real buy motivations like, I'm doing mining, I have a regulatory obligation, I'm doing it badly, I'd like to do it well. Those are really good in the short term as we build confidence in markets and scale those up. So thank you, Jen, I'll stop. But lots of challenges, but really excited to see what this goes.
Thank you, Siddharth, for framing it that way, because I think it gives us a good framework for the rest of our panelists to try to kind of address exactly how can nature tech address some of those specific challenges, whether it comes to measurement, which then enables management, or creating the investment case for nature. All right, our next speaker is Marianne Verles, who is the CEO of Sustain Cert. We are out of seats, so we can either do a musical chairs situation or...
Is this better? Yeah, cool. Thanks for the intro, Shaila. Really nice to be here. Many known faces and a number of new faces, which is great. I really enjoyed the MRV Collective London Climate Week event, and it's great to see many people here in New York today. So my name is Marion Verle. I'm the CEO and founder of Sustain Cert. We are a climate impact verifier. So I believe we fall in the nature tech category, the expanded category as well, and that we heard about earlier. So our role in the ecosystem is to verify climate impacts. We founded Sustain Cert back in 2018. I decided to launch Sustain Cert when I was CEO of the Gold Standard Foundation because I realized that the verification industry wasn't fit for purpose in the digital age. It wasn't scalable, and it wasn't delivering the high accuracy data, verified climate impact data that we need to scale this industry. So Sustain Cert was created with 2 mandates. One, to be the official certification body for gold standard, and two, to really scale credible climate action through digital verification solutions. And today I'm really humbled to be leading a team of 100+ climate scientists, data scientists, tech, product people united by this vision to scale credible climate action with digital verification solutions. So this is who we are. We're here to talk about case studies. Our case study is digital climate impact verification. We see through our platform and through our clients that are using our platform that digital verification unlocks not only speed, but also higher accuracy. And it's important because in carbon markets where we operate, as well as in Scope 3, corporate Scope 3 reporting where we operate, time to market is money. If you can issue your carbon credits faster, then you can sell when the price is right. You have less cash flow issues. If you have higher accuracy data because the data is collected digitally by the project developers and then sent digitally to our platform, who's verifying the data digitally through data science algorithm, outliers check, and other data-based checks, then you speed up the process, increase the accuracy of the data, and therefore the quality of the outcome, the climate impact outcome. It could be a carbon credit or a Scope 3 emission factor. And so that leads to higher prices, commercialization and monetization opportunities. So the benefit of digital verification are really significant. For project developers, it also means stronger predictability because as a project developer, you know straight away if your data is complete, if it meets our requirements, you don't have to wait a year and a manual audit process to know the quality of your data. So it de-risks the process, increases accuracy, and reduces time. This is all beautiful, and we're facing a number of challenges, which I'll talk about in a minute. So for us, 2023 was a really foundational year. We've closed our largest fundraising to date. And the sea change we've seen is that when we launched Sustained in 2018, the investor community didn't understand what verification was about. And 5 years later, we could actually run a competitive process and close our Series B. We've launched a digital verification platform at London Climate Week, and we're holding our flagship Scope 3 value change event in New York on Wednesday. And yet, we're facing challenges. We're ready, but what we're seeing is that the market isn't. Because for our nature tech and digital MRV solutions to take off, we need to create a new level playing field. We need the standards and the regulators to change their rules and requirements so that we can go through real-time issuance of carbon credits, real-time processing of greenhouse gas data, decoupled from data that is more difficult to digitize, and therefore handled separately. And without a new level playing field to unlock the power of digital verification and digital MRV, we're sort of stuck. And so my call to action to this group, the MRV Collective Nature for Climate, is how can we work together to create that new level playing field that will create the space for digital solution to really take off and become the new business as usual. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Marianne. And Sustained has made so much progress in this space, so it's really exciting to see all of the opportunities in digitization in carbon markets. All right, our next speaker is Megan Hertel, who is the Director of North America for Land Life.
Great. Congratulations, everyone. You got into the hottest club in New York. There are literally people still filtering in and peeking through the window. So thank you so much for using your elbows to get in here. I'm going to go ahead and tell you a story about Spring Creek. So in 2018, the Spring Creek fire hit a small town in southern Colorado called Fort Garland. It burned about 100,000 acres. At the time, it was the third largest fire in Colorado. It has since been surpassed, I'm sure, as all of you can guess. It damaged or destroyed hundreds of acres, and we lost critical habitat for species like the Canadian lynx, the Rocky Mountain elk, and the Mexican spotted owl. It is places like this that land life works. Land that is degraded, it's damaged, where nature is not coming back. But we don't just plant trees, we plant land life trees, as we like to call them. Those are trees that are backed by science and technology, and that are part of a nature design. So Land Life was actually founded as a tech company. Our CEO is here, Rebecca. So I better get this story right. We were designing in-field hardware that improved the survivability of trees in very arid regions. But what we realized is if our mission is to help restore the world's 2 billion hectares of degraded land, we needed to be implementing that nature tech out on the ground. And last year we planted roughly 3.5 million trees, about 400,000 of which were in that Spring Creek fire footprint. But technology is still at the heart of what we do, and it touches down at every stage of the reforestation cycle for us, everything from site selection and design all the way through to monitoring. Before we ever plant a land life tree, we spend a lot of time looking at the site to make sure that it's right for reforestation. So we've created something called the Smart Analysis Engine that we use internally that applies a lot of different layers where we can look at things like climatic variables, soil, topography. A big one for me is fire risk. How frequently are we going to see that fire return? And it allows us to remotely and quickly determine if a site is suitable for reforestation. So in Colorado, that means we can exclude areas that are coming back naturally. We can actually exclude slopes or rocky areas from our planting designs. To that, we then take it to our carbon capture and nature impacts projection model, which is a globally consistent and locally accurate carbon projection model. We put in exact species and densities to understand how much carbon those trees are going to sequester. We run it hundreds of times for every site, which means we can look at how small changes in species compositions impacts the removals that we're seeing. So we can optimize carbon, but not compromise on our nature restoration. So all of this in Colorado means that we actually come up with very locally appropriate designs that are lower density and in cluster plantings to be resilient. But this is probably one of my favorite parts of what we do. So we are also working to address the barriers that we see in the field. So some of the biggest barriers for those of you that do reforestation are nurseries, workforce, limited planting time. One of the things we've developed, I'm so glad I got through TSA with this, by the way, which is our smart coded seeds, which allow us to bring the nursery to the field. It means we can seed these at any time of year and they won't germinate until conditions are optimal. We also have our seedling incubators, which you can see a picture up here. These protect the young seedlings from animal browsing, from pests, from weeds, and they do it without putting harmful plastic in the field. In Colorado, we've actually been testing this and our seedling incubator for the last 2 years. And we'll be getting results soon, which I'm really excited about. And transparency is one of our core values. We were just talking with Tentry and Veritri about how important that is before this session. We collect a lot of data about all of our projects. It's one of our core values as our company is transparency. So we have our own in-house app that we add drone and satellite technology to. We're collecting data immediately after the planting to understand if the planting was successful. We come back 3 to 5 years later to see the survivorship of the trees and understand if we need to replant. And all of that data feeds into a reforestation database that we use to improve our designs going forward. So these are all really critical parts of what we do. In Colorado, we actually partner with a local university and we have STEM internships. So we work to bring out a new generation of people to get inspired to do this work going forward. So this is actually the Spring Creek fire and our planting last year. I was lucky enough to be out with these planting crews. This is not easy work, by the way, but it's also so inspiring to know that every one of those trees was backed by significant science and technology. Those crews are actually going to be out there in 2 more days, planting another 350,000 trees, bringing back the forest for the community there and for the species that need it. So my ask for all of you that very tentatively, by the way, raised your hand. Nobody was like, yeah, I'm in this sector, but for all of the sectors, technology is amazing, but we only can use it in collaboration with the people on the ground and with the people in this space, in this sector doing the work. So I would encourage all of you to think about how we can work together to meet the challenge that we've got in front of us, whether that's biodiversity loss, climate change, habitat destruction. It's going to take all of us in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I think your story and your example there really shows how all of the different applications of technology across the value chain. So thank you for sharing. All right, our next speaker is Kat Bruce, who is the founder of Nature Metrics.
Hey, everyone. I'll just wait for the slides to come up. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces in the audience, and thanks for the shout out already, Sid. So yeah, I'm the founder of Nature Metrics. I first raised angel funding for the company in 2015, and I was told, really? who's going to pay money to know about nature and biodiversity? And it's wonderful to be in the position where that is no longer asked of us. So anything that you are currently touching right now, you're leaving DNA on it, your own DNA. In fact, everywhere you go, you're leaving a trail of your DNA behind you. And so is every organism on the planet. So, oh, I've lost my turtle. Can we go back to the first slide, please? Oh, I have the control. Amazing. Brilliant. Cool. Cool. So this turtle, he's leaving a trail of DNA in the water. So is his jellyfish prey. So is the whale that just swam past. So is the plankton that forms the basis of the food web here. And so, like it or not, these beautiful waters that we snorkel through or that we spend time on are basically soups of DNA of the whole ecosystem. And in Nature Metrics, we take that DNA, we analyze it in our labs, and we turn it into data across the tree of life that we can use to drive metrics to show how biodiversity is changing. Now, I said that I was asked about who's going to buy this when I first started the company. And the answer is that actually there are companies who are required to do biodiversity monitoring and have been for a very long time. In fact, if you're doing environmental impact assessment, if you're in mining, energy, infrastructure, etc., if you're operating in natural habitats, you're required to have no net loss of biodiversity. If you're operating in critical habitats, you're required to have a net positive impact on biodiversity. That's been the case for a while. But biodiversity surveys has been such a headache for these companies. They send loads of people out to really remote places, and they come back with very little data for informing decision making. So straight away, environmental DNA is something that has changed the game for all of these companies. We love opportunities to go head to head with environmental DNA against conventional monitoring methods because we pretty much always win. But this was an example from a wind farm monitoring program in the North Sea. We're working with EDF and Natural Power, we're going head to head with fish surveys from eDNA versus trawling, which is pretty nasty, heavy impact method of doing surveying. And on average, we're getting about 70% more fish species for every survey effort in almost half the vessel time. So that's a huge cost saving for these clients before you even look at the value of the data. And we've been able to see the same patterns of seasonal variation in the fish across summer, however the seasons go. Winter, spring, summer, autumn. Anyway, yeah, so you can see all of those same patterns, which match exactly what we expect from the decades of historical knowledge that we have. We also found in this particular sample, particular project, there was a very tiny number of blue whale sequences. Blue whales weren't known in this area of the North Sea, so we were a little nervous about that. And then about 3 weeks ago, there was a paper published which said first recorded sightings of blue whales in the North Sea. It was about 10 miles from this project and in the same season. So the power of this to detect really rare species is unbelievable. It's not just when we're talking about water. So we take DNA from water, from soil, and also from the air. We're just starting to work with the air. It's not just aquatic species that leave their DNA in the water. So across large parts of the world, we're working with organizations who are using this as ways of tracking and monitoring very hard to observe land-based species. So Fauna and Flora International are doing a lot of work across West Africa, where they're training up national park rangers and community assistants to collect these samples. And one of the most amazing things about DNA is you can literally go, I've gone head to head with my colleague's 5-year-old daughter, and you can't tell the difference between the data that came from her sample and the data that came from mine. So this is something we can put in the hands of local stakeholders, of on-site contractors, of school kids, of literally anybody, and start building the links and involving and empowering communities to get involved in this. So this particular project actually came from anecdotal reports of pygmy hippos from local communities, who then went and collected the water samples themselves, which gave that evidence base that allowed Fauna and Flora International to go and deploy conservation resources into these areas where pygmy hippos hadn't been known before. At the same time, they just happened to get the first country record of the Thai toad, a range extension of a critically endangered fish, all sorts of just huge richness of data coming out of every project. Now, I mentioned the whole tree of life, and so far I've just talked about vertebrates. A lot of the aspects of biodiversity that are actually often most fundamentally linked to the functioning and resilience of ecosystems and their ability to provide services to us are the small bits of biodiversity, the small things that run the world, the bacteria, the fungi, the invertebrates. And DNA gives us the ability to generate data on those parts of the of biodiversity as well. So some of the work we've been doing with land life is working with soils to look at the communities of fungi and bacteria and to show how those are changing through the restoration process. And we can see big differences in the number of fungal species and degraded versus good quality forest species. We can see that the identities of those species are really different. So we can start to build a picture of what diversity looks like in degraded versus good quality ecosystems. And we can also turn those into functional profiles, which can tell us how much of the biodiversity is doing different jobs within that environment, linking it directly to ecosystem services. We wouldn't be a tech company without having a platform. So very excited that we're going to be launching our nature intelligence platform in just a couple of weeks' time, where we can really, clients can really interact with that data. We can share it, combine data sets, see those trends over time, and do some of the data analytics in the platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kat. And your work makes the whole concept of biodiversity credits and monitoring a lot less daunting. So congrats on all of the progress. All right, our next speaker is Jonathan Kim, who is the VP of Climate Impact at Terraformation.
Okay, I think I'm just barely taller than this podium, so hopefully everybody can see me. Cool. So, Jonathan, Terraformation is a climate tech company focused on scaling native reforestation. It's something that's been really key to what we do. And I was putting together these slides, and I made this one kind of in a funny way. In my job, I talk to tons of corporations and foundations, institutions about wanting to support the work that we're doing and the work that many of you are doing. And one of the things that I noticed that I thought was appropriate to bring to this group is that when I talk to an investor, many people actually think that MRV is this sort of check the box exercise, right? It's this thing that you just kind of do. Their expectation is that it's really clear. And actually, in going through and making this slide, I realized I've only been myself working in climate for a couple of years. And gosh, if I hear another tech person tell me about NF trees or some other thing out there, there's just a lot that you need to learn about this space. And when I approached it, I thought, oh yeah, of course we'll be able to use satellites to just see all the trees, and we'll just count them all up, and that'll be the sum of the carbon. It'll be really easy. And so this is what people expect, I think, when you talk to them about monitoring and doing restoration. One of the things that we found is that the reality of that is really different. I think Megan probably understands as well, and some of the others here. Okay. So I'm proud to share. This is our site from 2016. This is one of our sites on the Big Island of Hawaii. This is our baseline scenario. So we started the company in 2019. This is one of our flagship sites. Let's see if we can progress it. Yeah, this is 2019. You can see the amazing progress that we're starting to make here. 2021, and I think there was even a slide after this that I didn't add, but really difficult, right? This is almost fully planted in 2021. Impossible to see the work that gone into this. You know, we've got a seed bank set up there. We've got solar off-grid desalination happening. And this is the credit that we get from a satellite. This is 30-centimeter resolution. And so when you talk about how do you bring transparency, how do you bring trust into the system, I think for some areas it is working. For other areas, we have a lot of work to do. And one of the ways that we've tried to solve this ourselves is just trying to figure out, like, what would we do if we really wanted to try to make this more transparent, bring it out of the dark. We've actually tried manually tracking every single tree out in the field. Actually, in some of our sites, we still have that data. Some of our partner sites, we've even tried that. And as I'm sure some of the people that have maybe thought about this or considered it, it's incredibly untenable. So the best that we've ended up coming up with is this is actually one of those data points. So this is every single tree color-coded by species on about a 50-hectare site right now on the Big Island. And we've got a number of these. So we know what it takes and we know how valuable that data is on a per tree level. This actually makes it easy for us to go back, track the progress, track it at every single step of the way, replant, understand the species, and then model carbon that comes out of the projects. And this is really difficult to Okay, we'll try. We're back. The way that we've actually been able to make this work is similar to how you would imagine the post office does it, right? So the post office doesn't go out, deliver mail, and then go to every single mailbox to figure out how much mail they sent out that day, right? They do it at a central post office. In restoration, that's the nursery. And even before that, we actually have people going out in the field to collect wild seed because these are biodiverse native forests. And so we arm them with technology at every step of the way. And what we end up with is this chain of custody. So it's actually more than the accumulation of all these data points on this map. You actually get a chain of custody to where those trees were in the nursery, who they were withdrawn by, who they were grown by, you know, how many of them survived, where that seed was collected out in the field. And so you have this entire map. You can kind of analogize it to like a Amazon Prime, right? Or sort of a shipping, you know what your package is at every step of the way. And if we can bring that level of data, imagine just how much richer the rest of the type of auditing that we do becomes. Today, you may be doing MRV out in person. You may be doing it with satellite. This is another axis that you can start to consider how you measure and understand what went into that forest. And just think of the possibilities that you could do with this data as you start to layer on other types of monitoring, carbon estimations, all these kinds of cool things that are possible with this. And this is one of the things that we're starting to do at scale now with our projects. These were 50 hectares or so. We're starting to implement that on multi-thousand hectare projects. So I'm really excited to do this. If anybody wants to talk to us about there's tons of challenges, I'm happy to share all the hard and painful stories that went into getting to this level of understanding. It was incredibly humbling, but would love to partner with you all on that.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, our next speaker is Manuel Penuela, who is the co-founder and CEO of Cultivo.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the introduction and for the invitation. So James and I started Cultivo about 5 years ago as an idea in the back of a napkin. And what I'm going to show you today is one of our projects that is very close to heart. First and foremost, it's from Mexico. I'm from Mexico. But more than that is that it's in the Central Valley of Mexico. And this is one of the areas that has been degraded for multiple pressures, let alone urban pressures, but also the fact that this came out of, we were talking about land use authoritarian rights, out of the Mexican Revolution, highly segmented into ejidos, very complex land stewardship. But this community in the Central Valley got together with a local partner, NGO, as well as a project developer, and got some money to start planting trees that were where it used to be a corn plantation. Now, it's so close that we've taken the team there, but more than that is that we looked at, through our platform, what were the biophysical characteristics of the project? From what was the right ecosystem that should be planted there, what trees, what was the soil moisture potential, and how would the water balance change with those trees, and as well as what and how should biodiversity come back? And all of these elements started to help us underwrite the project and the opportunity, because what was happening is that this community was about to sell carbon credits at $3 a ton 3 years ago to an energy company. That's below the cost of production by many dollars. So what we also looked at was the non-biophysical characteristics that this industry needs to get those projects off the ground. So they got grants, but they needed more capital to keep going. And so what we landed was actually trading 3 years ago at 15, and now this is trading at more than $25 a ton. But what matters here is that carbon is just part of the capital stack of this community. What you see here is that this community of ejido communal members live from timber, sustainable forest managed timber, as well as carbon, becoming more and more important. And that carbon allows them to then diversify what economies come into the community. For sure, it starts to come into creating some climate resilience from trailheads and fire, and more importantly, using the community to actually plant more and more trees and support the trees that are there, that because of climate change, they're seeing a lot of new pests coming into the forest. So yeah, I agree, super challenging. It's well beyond the planting of the trees, but even something more complex, which goes back to who does this project. Yes, it's a local NGO that we build trust with and local partners, but what matters is that to be in that room with those elders, Adolfo, our team member, had to be there and build trust. And that trust only comes with time. So it's time to prove what we meant when we believe that capital to this space moves at the speed of trust. And so that just takes a while. And to get there, we had to work with a community. And what we're starting to see is that if you think that monitoring biodiversity and water and different elements of the MRV stack is complex, monitoring social impact is even, I would say, more complex. And in that case, what we started to see is that in this community, men are coming back. Why were they not there? Well, they have migrated here. They have migrated because of social pressures. They're starting to come back into the community because now the community, as you could see, is financially sustainable, becoming more and more because of this. So now monarch butterfly is coming back to that region. Yes, this is an area where monarch butterfly should be, but they're coming back. And more importantly, from a water perspective, this is fundamental to one of the largest cities in the planet, Mexico City. This is a place where, thanks to this project, the local aquifer is getting replenished, and also with high quality levels of water. So as we grow, now ecotourism is becoming very important to the community. Not any type of ecotourism, high-end ecotourism is taking more and more time, but also bringing more resources. So then the challenge goes, how do you then do those nature-based solutions guided with technology and be able to support and so at the end of this, what matters to us is back to scale. So that's where we started. And where we're heading now is that we're now changing, back to Seed's point, the capital stack across this ecosystem. More importantly, support communities across 20 sites. So the capital stack is also extremely important. We're not only equities landing here, but we're starting to unlock debt also for these communities, only with the ecosystem of partners that we've built, and in the center of that, the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Our next speaker is Beatriz Mulianitaki, who is the CCO of Meridia.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Good. So thank you for having me here today. I crossed the pond for my first time here at Climate Week New York City. It's very exciting. I don't know where I'm going afterwards because it's all pretty chaotic, but I'm sure I'm going to be back next time. So a little bit about where we're coming from and where we're going. So we started in 2015 on a mission to prove that affordable land documents was possible. It was a crazy Dutch guy, a crazy Danish guy, and one sane Ghanaian guy. And they actually were able to pull it off. So this software showed to be the gem of our company. And now it's actually used for data collection by many companies, some of you that you also see here. We operate also on the ground with our field staff. And the past years, we've really evolved into an agricultural software company, really specializing in data collection, data management, and data verification linked to smallholders. Smallholders linked to supply chains like cocoa, coffee, palm oil, and so forth. So what I want to share with you today is that many of these companies, some that are also put their trust in us, they're getting very nervous because of the regulation. The regulation is really asking for more transparency and traceability and compliance. So what we see in practice is that basically 75% of companies across sectors would actually not be ready for the regulation. And this is really serious risk for these companies. It could involve serious penalties, supply chain disruptions, but also reputational harm, and even becoming a criminal offense if you cannot meet the claim of no deforestation, for instance. So this is really becoming serious business. And this is where we're leaning in. Being called the data doctor, they asked us, could you not come up with a solution to help us understand the veracity of our data? So the past year, we've worked also with our current customers, also research organizations, to develop a methodology, develop new technology, and create benchmarks to quickly verify the veracity of smallholder data. So what does that look like? This gives you an example of our scorecard. This is actually based on a real farm data set from one of our partners from the Ivory Coast. And it shows that 7.6% is like really critical. It means it's that erroneous, that flawed, and maybe even fraudulent, that if you would get audited, you would get that penalty. And this would not be good for your reputation, nor for your customers who you're actually selling the product to. We also identify the major risk contributors, because having come from data collection, we can actually help companies improve their data quality also pretty quickly. And what we also do is we check the compliance. And I think this is a really great visualization. You can be compliant with crappy data, right? And this is not what we want. We need to do better for ourselves as companies, selling products, carrying liabilities through the supply chain, but especially also for those farmers, because they need to be made visible. Their assets need to be made visible. And especially if we want to ensure that they don't encroach in more forested area or protected and forest areas. So another example that I was asked to share with you is actually our partnership that we launched last week with ICE. Some of you might know ICE. They actually service futures exchange for cocoa and coffee globally. And we're partnering with them now with their new tradability platform that they're going to set up. And they are servicing 3 million metric tons of cocoa and 3 million metric tons of coffee into the European Union, and to help it to continue trading, but also to be compliant. This needs to be ready by December 2024. And we're actually integrating our new methodology and technology and benchmarks into this platform, what we call an internal verification engine. So this is an example how with willing partners, we can actually do so many cool things, and not only cool, but really lift the bars across the sector. So why am I here? I'm looking for those new partners who are willing to try something out new. There's no silver bullet, but if you're interested, please reach out to me. And yeah, hopefully next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. Our next speaker is Chrissy Durkin, who is the VP of Growth and Impact at Rainforest Connection.
Hey, everybody. Cool, it's still working. I mean, I'm so happy to be here with you all, even just listening to everyone here. It's so inspiring because there's so many ways we need to pull all of this together. And I think being in rooms together is the best way to do that. So I'm Chrissy with Rainforest Connection and Arbimon, and we focus on sound. So sound to detect the presence of threats in ecosystems, and then also to monitor biodiversity. So we're a team of field experts. We go into the field and train local NGOs, communities, governments, ecotourism, all sorts of different folks. We're a team of PhD ecoacoustic biologists who specialize in using these data to better understand what's happening within ecosystems, data scientists and engineers, and we're really building kind of an end-to-end solution in how to use sound to actually implement positive change on the ground. So sound is quite an incredible type of data. Most species make noise. Like Kat said with eDNA, we're also communicating using sound right now, and so do birds and frogs and bats and mammals and insects. So there's an incredible amount of information we can get out of sound, both species presence, but also behavior. We're starting to get into being able to understand abundance. I mean, there's so much, even in this 45-second audio clip, you can see how many species are communicating. So some of the benefits are you can use really inexpensive, small devices that are easy to deploy. You can cover large areas with them, and you can basically have a bunch of, it's like having a bunch of not biased scientists that you can leave in the field for a long time, right? And then we can survey multiple species simultaneously. Basically, we can really decrease the on-the-ground effort, time, and cost using acoustic data. It's nothing new. Bioacoustics is a field of study that's been around for a long time. A century. Some of the hard parts, though, is it's a huge amount of data. There's so much information in there. How do you actually store, manage, and extract useful insights out of acoustic data? So that's really what our focus has been. How do we create a space in which we can make it possible for scientists around the world to collaborate on these data sets? How do we create algorithms and AI models to actually extract useful insights from that data? And then how do we share that in a way that is useful to everyone beyond science? How do we start to bridge that gap between science and actually action on the ground? Our solution to that has been RBMON, which is a free, open source, and accessible online platform where we currently have thousands of scientists from about 120 countries collecting data, uploading it into the platform, and using it to analyze. So some of the benefits of that are we're starting to be able to have insights across regions, countries, and even global scales using actual data from the ground. So currently we have about 130 million minutes of audio data in the platform, which is from about 120 countries. And then our team partners directly on projects around the world as well. So here's one example of that. It was awesome to just hear the last presentation because we should figure out how we can work together. One example is we're working with WCS in Colombia with smallholder cocoa growers. Essentially, we've trained over 200 individuals to be able to deploy these inexpensive, really simple acoustic monitoring devices across their farms, collect acoustic data, and then we're building artificial intelligence models to be able to track indicator species across all those plots. Now, that's really cool because now into the future, we're going to be able to continue to enable them to collect data, put it in the platform, and then automatically understand how species presence is changing across their sites. So the goal is really how do we integrate these results into larger dashboards, how to make it really easy to share this data with and combine it with some of these awesome other solutions that everyone has been talking about here, so that it's really useful for tracking progress over time. So what we're focused on is building regional artificial intelligence models for species presence. We currently have them for many biodiversity hotspots around the world. Once we've built these models, you no longer have to be a scientist to collect data, understand species presence. You can collect data, use the models, validate the results, and then you can understand species presence across large areas without necessarily having to be a scientist or a data scientist. We then combine this presence data with additional environmental and climatic variables like forest cover, land use type, temperature, rainfall, and we can get to all of these more advanced ecological analyses like we look at richness, composition, occupancy, and then we're starting to derive a lot of different indicators for different markets and opportunities so that we can really track what progress looks like in a more in-depth way. Just like everyone else here, then that's displayed in kind of a final visualizations dashboard in which we can see species presence, but also get into some more of those ecological insights. And we're making it really easy to understand so that you don't have to be a scientist, so that the smallholder cocoa growing folks can actually see what presence looks like and progress looks like across their sites. But our goal is really also to be able to integrate these results in with other data sets in external platforms and make it so that we can start to bring all of these pieces together. And that is the same message everyone else has been saying, which is we need collaboration in this space. I mean, we have so many of these individual solutions. It's time to bring them together. So that's why I'm very excited to be in rooms like this with so many of these innovators and awesome folks on the same page. So thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy, for that really compelling example. All right, our last speaker is Tom Elliott, who is the founder of and CEO of Restore.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. I'm not actually the founder of Restore. That's Tom Crowther. I'm the CEO. And it's a real honor to follow up from all these incredible solutions. Thank you so much for the invitation. And hopefully I can kind of bring together some of what's been talked about today. But I'd like to start off with just a simple survey, if I can, just to begin with. How many of you started your morning with a cup of coffee? The vast majority of the room. Thanks very much. Well, the drink that so many of you started your day with has its roots in the Kaffa region of Ethiopia. And coffee is still being grown there today. In fact, you can see a coffee cultivation here. The land has been cleared to make room to plant coffee trees. But in order to grow quickly and yield a big crop, they need pesticides and fertilizers, as well as water, and lots of it. As much as 140 liters are needed to grow the beans for a single cup of coffee. Now, I don't want to pick on these particular farmers. I just want to show you a typical example of how agriculture works all over the world. It's typical because it works, at least for a while. Pesticides, fertilizers, and irrigation do increase crop yields, and so a vicious cycle begins. More land clearing, more pesticides, more fertilizers, more irrigation, more deforestation, until biodiversity, soil fertility, water resources, and local livelihoods are depleted. In fact, a recent UN report states that the biggest cause of land degradation worldwide is agriculture. But it's also a source, as we've known, of great opportunity. And now I'd like to show you another farm in this same region. I know, you can't see it. It looks just like a forest, and that's kind of the point. Meet Desta Kabede. His family are originally from Ethiopia, where his coffee farm is. But like me, he lives in Zurich, where he has a business selling the coffee grown in the forest. Here, Desta plants native coffee trees in the sunny patches of a beautiful rainforest. The surrounding ecosystem traps water and nutrients which allow the coffee trees to grow and produce berries without irrigation or fertilizer. Biodiversity in the surrounding forest thrives, which is good for the forest, which is good for the coffee crop, and it's good for the local people that work on the farm. What we're starting to see now is that other farmers and other members of the local community are also getting interested in protecting the forest for the benefit of their own crops and ultimately their income. What we're starting to see here is the beginning of a virtuous cycle where protecting nature brings ecological and economic stability to a system and ultimately leads to protecting more nature. At Restore, we are building the technology to find these local scale feedback loops and provide them with the momentum that they need to scale. With over 140,000 projects on the platform to date, Restore is like a Google Maps for nature. Instead of cities and shops, it tells the stories of wetland restoration projects and coral farms, of regenerative farmers like Desta, and of also both large scale and community scale conservation projects around the world. But of course, we all have an impact on the land. And so anyone can use Restore to access any location on the planet and get ecological insights about those locations. We've also got satellite data going back for over a decade, so you can start to really see how the vegetation is changing over time. It really is quite impactful for most of the sites, but maybe not the terraformation ones. Finally, the best part about it is, and probably the most important aspect, is that it's providing a place for the nature restoration community to come together. Communities, projects, NGOs, governments, businesses, investors, and anyone else. We've got organizations, partners like Nature Metrics providing the community with constantly evolving eDNA monitoring technology. We've got Rainforest Connection supporting the government of Costa Rica here with bioacoustic monitors, and also Terraformation are helping sites, trying to find sites to identify and help them scale for rapidly evolving nature credit markets. And as this kind of network of collective action grows, we believe that we can start to build a powerful new feedback loop. Because as we find the projects around the world are kind of, the connections are starting to multiply, and organizations are sharing more data with one another, more knowledge about the solutions that are working in their territory. Trust is starting to be gained. We're finding then that we can all start to move towards a world where we can get a better understanding of how the products we buy and the investments we make actually impact the communities on the ground that are actually protecting and restoring nature. This, everybody, is Restore. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. So I think that concludes our session of speakers and examples. So I'll just do a very quick wrap up and then we'll open the floor for your questions and comments. And maybe what we'll do is consolidate a few of the questions and then kind of get some responses from our speakers and panelists. But it struck me that it seems like a lot of what we heard really falls into maybe 4 unique buckets. The first would be using nature tech to optimize and increase efficiencies in carbon markets in particular, given that there's a relatively mature market around carbon credits and carbon markets. And we heard about that from Cultivo, from Sustain Cert. It's like really an active opportunity there, especially amidst all of the trust concerns and the credibility concerns around nature carbon credits. The second is measuring and valuing non-carbon benefits. And we heard about that specifically from Rainforest Connection, the acoustic monitoring from nature metrics and biodiversity monitoring, and of course, Restore, really kind of reinforcing this fact that we can't live in a reductive way where all that matters is carbon, that there's actually value and utility in measuring more than just carbon. Then the third is really allowing investors or buyers to see the impacts of their investments, right? So to be able to visualize, and we saw some of that from terraformation and some of the striking imagery and the ability to monitor in real time the impacts of some of those investments. And also from Meridia on the data and the value of that data. And then the last two I would say is on the disclosures and reporting, right? So how can we use nature tech to actually enable those that are liable or responsible for reporting back to key stakeholder groups to do so with more confidence? And we also heard about that from Meridia. So to me, it almost seems like there were these kind of unique use cases that a lot of what we heard about falls into. But what strikes me is what are the opportunities for consolidation, right? To really see, do we need 100 more companies doing what was represented here? How do we grow the companies and grow the efforts of those that spoke? How can we all support this community and this kind of community of practice through this dialogue and conversation that we're having? And how do we ensure that every project, every carbon project benefits from these technologies, right? What are the mechanisms? Is cost a barrier? Is knowledge a barrier? Is awareness a barrier? Right? So there's a number of things for us to really unpack here because, you know, rather than keeping all of these solutions in their silos or in their niche applications, how do we bring them together would be kind of one next step that I think we can explore in our discussion session. And then last thing, just to bring it back to what Siddharth was saying, is how do we make this relevant for buyers? How do we use everything that we've talked about to increase buyer confidence and ultimately increase the market and increase the effectiveness of those markets over time? So really, really great examples. And I'm sure you're all brimming with questions, comments, ideas to share. So let's open it up for a dialogue. Please just raise your hand and we can maybe get a few comments, a few questions, and then we'll turn to our panelists. We'll start with you. Maybe for the right price. Yeah, great. Okay, let's take a few more questions and then we can get some responses. Yeah. Thank you. Such an important question. And maybe for everybody here, what is your business model, right? How do you grow and how do you scale the technology? And ultimately, what is it dependent on? Is it dependent on carbon credit revenues or on the growth of a biodiversity market? Would love for us to cover that when we start hearing your responses. All right, let's take one more question and then we'll hear from our panelists. Yep, right. Great question. All right, well, I don't know if any of our panelists want to kick off by responding. We've got kind of 3 distinct questions. Yes, Manuel.
See if this works. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. So just on the first one on pricing, size, and quality, I think that at the core of that is being transparent on the buildup of the project and the overall collection of what an investor and off-taker is looking at. And we start from a perspective that the quality bar is going up as it should, but selling something that is super high quality from the get-go.
Maybe I shouldn't give him this. I don't know.
And thank you. But it's that progression of a portfolio that matters to the investors, right? It's how do you start bringing scale and quality across a time series? So giving those customers, both at the off-taker side as well as the investor side, that are starting to converge a lot, that transparency and visibility as to how you expect quality and size to grow has been fundamental to us. And I think that's connected to the question from Sean in terms of how does a community and our local partners start to absorb when the revenues start to come in. And so from the get-go, it starts with a design as to how the capital is going to come in, how the profit share is going to work with all the different parts, that it's the community plus the different service providers to the company that is set up. But it's also on making sure that the uses of the capital are according to plan. I think it's very easy to deviate as the time starts to go through a project as to where the investments were, especially when you're having a quality bar increasing all the time in terms of what has to be monitored. So the conversation on how that capital is used is sometimes now we're starting to see that in many projects, more capital is used for the monitoring and the reporting to then catch up to the quality bar that is now being set in the market. But therefore, ideally, that is then been a counterpoint to a higher price in the market. So our promise to our local partners is that we're going to try to keep those 2 mark-to-market components at the balance. And so more or less that's, Sean, what we're aiming for in terms of the balance with our community.
Siddharth needs to leave us shortly, so maybe we'll let you take the next.
The Goldilocks questions work? No, maybe. The Goldilocks question is a really good one. I would separate buyers from investors. I think with buyers of environmental attributes, call it carbon, biodiversity, whatever it might be, you want to see over time less Goldilocks behavior. Or you want people agreeing on what good is and what it looks like. And generally speaking, you as an individual project developer, you don't want to be negotiating bespoke transactions with buyers. That all of these companies and a lot of you are working on that problem. I think, frankly, we haven't agreed on what good looks like, and that's part of the problem. And I think that's getting better, hopefully, over time. With investors, financial investors, our whole job is about finding Goldilocks, sweet spot type deals, right? So every single transaction looks different. I don't think it's ever going to go away. I don't think it's a bad thing, because in every other climate, nature, call it whatever you want, you do have these Goldilocks situations where we think the price is right, the market is something we like the team. There are lots of pieces that come together to make an investment. So I think that's probably a good thing. And the same is true actually of project investors in climate infrastructure, where, like for example, at Generation and Just Climate, we recently invested in a company called H2 Green Steel, which is the world's first green steel plant. I think it's a nice analogy for nature because it's the world's first. It's really a Goldilocks type situation. But lots of individuals had to come together and kind of get to conviction on this will work. And hopefully over time it becomes less so, but I wouldn't worry so much about investors demanding it. I'd worry a lot more about buyers, and Time CO2 is doing some of that work to say this is what good looks like. I think that's probably where the fight is. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hop up here. All right. I think,
Could I add to that?
yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. First, there's probably a reason all of us have a dashboard, right? So Land Life, we also have a dashboard where we put our data up for our customers and our partners. It's called SIA, but I think almost every one of us talked about a dashboard. And that's because we want to bring our partners and our customers, who we think of in the same way, along with us, so they can understand the journey and they can really see the value in the projects that we do. There's also a reason Land Life is a for-profit company, right? We're a public benefit corporation, but we made that choice rather than be a nonprofit because we believe that nature can be paid for by private capital. There will always be a role for nonprofits. They're incredibly important, but what we bring to the table is a complement to that. And we pride ourselves on being able to talk to investors and talk about IRRs, right? And translate the work that we're doing on the ground into something that makes sense for them.
Chris, do you want to say something? No, you're good. Okay, so Tom?
Yeah, perhaps I can answer the question on Restore. We are a Swiss nonprofit, and yes, it is entirely free. Everything on the platform, you can access all of that information. And we're incredibly fortunate to be entirely philanthropically funded up until this point. We partnered with Google, who built the platform for us, and we've been lucky to be supported by Swiss philanthropists as well as Salesforce as well. But we do recognize the need to generate that sustainable revenue stream, and that's really what we're thinking about next in terms of our long-term security. And there are two ways that we're thinking about doing that. The first is that we're getting big brands coming to us now and wanting to understand how they can show that they are supporting communities on the ground. You know, we're hearing a lot of them talk about that message of understanding. You know, 4 years ago when we launched a huge paper talking about the tree restoration potential around the world, and there's 1 trillion trees that could potentially be restored outside of urban and agricultural areas, the message that got taken out of that was trees for carbon. And, you know, obviously we know the message, how the communication got lost. We've got a redo of that paper coming out in a couple of months, and the message is all going to be about how it's about biodiversity for people in order to achieve those global goals. And so we're thinking, how can we create dashboards where companies can actually show how they are supporting those communities on the ground that are on Restore? More dashboards. The second aspect of it is I was thinking about, we're developing a new measure of biodiversity to measure something we're calling biocomplexity for any location on the planet. And potentially that is another way that we can provide services to these big organizations that are coming under pressure from their consumers, but also because of the hard regulations that are coming in with EU CSRD and TNFD, etc.
Maybe Kat, Chrissy, Marianne, if you wouldn't mind responding to the question about data and, you know, what is that quality bar that you look at when you produce information?
We keep going along the row. Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question around the quality, and I could talk for quite a long time about this. I'll try not to. But I think there's a few different things I would say. One is that there is a tendency for new technologies to be held to a much, much higher bar than incumbent methodologies. And I think we see that a lot. And so it's important to remember that with any tool, any method, it's going to have its own set of limitations and biases and things it's really good at and things it's not so good at. And the key is recognizing and understanding and very clear and transparent about when things should be used and how they should be used, and that there's actually a whole suite of tools that work together. I think there's also something around, well, two things. One is there's also something around being very transparent and working together with different stakeholders to figure out different ways to label and communicate different levels of uncertainty within data, so that the people receiving that data and acting on it can take that into account when they're doing that. So, for example, we're working with IUCN to figure out how we label the confidence of the species identifications that come out of the eDNA, because there are some use cases where you need to have really, really high confidence of the species identification in order to take action. And there's others where it's not so important. So then the user can make those judgments themselves. And finally, I would say one of the things that it's been a bit of a bugbear for me around biodiversity measurement for a while has been a sort of a jump to go, oh, biodiversity is so complex that we'll just sort of bypass all of the complexity and come up with some sort of very simple to measure, top-down, black box measurement, which really doesn't involve looking at the land in any way, shape, or form. And if we're going to change something, you know, we're going to drive positive outcomes for nature, something on the ground somewhere has to change. And with this needs radical collaboration from all stakeholders, from the people on the ground all the way up to like the banks and the project financiers. And so we've got to have measurements that are meaningful to the people on the ground, so that they can also feed in their knowledge and their challenge and improve the quality of the data. And those of us working on nature technology have to have our ears open to that and not forget that there is all of these, you know, decades and centuries of knowledge on the ground about biodiversity and nature, and we have to work with that and build on it to empower and scale it. We're not trying to replace it, and we're not trying to bypass it.
That was quite beautifully said and agreed. Some of the challenges are really that there's so many different kinds of stakeholders that need to utilize this data, right? Even in one project that we do, there's local communities who can make use of the data. There's the folks financing the project that want certain things reported, right? There's the folks who want to tell the story of the project and they want to be able to see, you know, beautiful visualizations and things, right? So part of the data quality and also just like how you're looking at the data, it varies so much by the project application, and it varies so much by the stakeholders who are making use of it too, right? So there's all of these challenges, and then there's also the challenges around standardization across projects that you can actually start to compare these things. So there's a ton there that can be discussed. But I would say like some of the things we're trying to do is how do you create it kind of similarly to what Kat was talking about? How do you make it transparent, right? So you're saying, okay, this is how confident we are in species identifications. This is the accuracy and precision of models. This is, you can actually link back to the raw data set so that people have open access to that so that you can actually see where it's coming from. How do you make it so that at least as we're all going through this process of figuring out the best way to do this for all of these different stakeholders, how do you at least make it open in a way that you can dig into where it came from and how it was determined, right? And then that kind of goes into your question about kind of percentage of species that you can identify with acoustics, right? That's a hard question to answer because it varies considerably by ecosystem type. But some of the important things to think about are, okay, but it's not so much about how many species necessarily as how can I reliably and accurately understand change over time in an ecosystem, right? Some cool things about acoustics and why I chose to work in the space of acoustics is because so many really important species that represent ecosystem health are vocalizing, like birds and amphibians and insects. Also, some of the cool things is that non-vocalizing species are really well measured with eDNA. So it's like, or are really well captured with camera trapping, right? Like big cats are really hard to monitor with acoustics, but you capture them with camera traps. So some of the questions around that are, how do we bring all of these different data types together in ways that you can more holistically understand ecosystem health? Because there's so much opportunity there. And then a lot of the work we do is also not just species specific focused, but how do we create acoustic indices, soundscape indices that are awesome at understanding what change looks like. And then how do you bring all these things together, like looking at the soundscape as a whole, looking at individual species presence, composition of species, do you have a bunch of invasive species in there? I mean, there's so much to think about the complexity. We're working with the American Bird Conservancy to look at guilds, right? Like frugivores and all these different, I mean, there's so much you can get into. So it's a matter of how do you have sort of a suite of metrics that work together so that you can have a comprehensive understanding. We're not convinced there's sort of this one magical golden indicator that represents progress, but I think we can paint a really good picture if we can bring data sets together and look at all of these things simultaneously. So yeah.
And I think we'll give Marianne and Jonathan the last word, final comments and responses to the questions.
Yeah, and I'm happy to use the data question maybe to extrapolate a little bit on the situation we're in as a community of practitioners. The truth is that we don't have a straight answer to the question on data. So there's no globally accepted way of doing it right. And it speaks to the fact that this is a still early stage ecosystem. It took our global ecosystem 100 years to get financial accounting and auditing right. We don't have 100 years to get this right. There's a climate emergency going on, so we need to be much, much faster than that. So the question to me is, how do we as an ecosystem get organized to produce responses to those questions as quickly as we can in a fraction of the 100 years it took to standardize financial accounting? And then how do we get organized such that we create an environment where the competition we see with all the new players coming in is driving a race to the top as opposed to a race to the bottom? And finally, how do we create an ecosystem that will, in a targeted way, influence the stakeholders we need to influence to create a level playing field where digital solutions can be used at scale for reporting against nature requirements, climate requirements, and biodiversity requirements, because we're not there yet.
Thanks. I think every human being on the planet values nature. And I think everybody in this room is here because we are trying to change. We are trying to take that belief and translate that into action, right? We are trying to take, at the end of the day, we're trying to take money and bring that into the work that we're all trying to see happen in the world. And some of the things that frustrates me is I feel like in a lot of times we are going about it, we're playing the wrong game, right? What I love and what I hate about when an investor asks me about IRR, I think it's unrealistic to ask for 25% IRR. I was at an event in March where the investor was like, we are ready to invest in scale-ready technologies, promising a 25% IRR. And I was like, you're going to be waiting for a while. Good, hope you got the carry. But the thing that I like about it is that they're clear, right? When somebody tells me, I want transparency, I want to ask how much. When somebody says, I want to measure biodiversity, I want to say, what do you want to measure, right? I think that those are the kinds of things that we need to be asking, because the standards and quality is ambiguous. When somebody says they want a high quality project, we really need to double click on what that means. And when they meet it, they've got to deliver, because I feel like we are chasing the ball on their playing field rather than saying, if you truly do value nature, like, let's put it down into terms and let's get this done. Because we don't have time to continue to chase this ever increasing standard. I think all of us are doing our best to do that, but I feel like we need to draw a line and say, this is really like where the action needs to start and where we can continue to improve together, make this even better, but we got to start now.
Thank you, Jonathan. So let's hear just a final round of applause for all of our speakers. They're very inspiring stories. And to close out our event, I am delighted to introduce Gilad Goren, who is the Executive Director of the MRV Collective.
Kind of feel like a DJ here. All right, DJ Gilad on 1 and 2s. Hey everyone, wow. Some of you guys snuck into this room. We are not up to fire code. No. Anyways, I am really grateful that you are all here. I did go through the roles. We have some incredible pioneers, leaders, financiers, just wow. So I'm going to say, give yourselves a round of applause, and we should all do that because this is pretty amazing. Thank you for coming. That's pretty clap. Yeah. You know, a few weeks ago, I had a chat with Thomas Quigley from Superorganism, that guy right there. And we start the call. He says, I'm really excited to chat with you. I was like, really? Why? And he shared that he learned that MRV Collective is category building. We're building the nature tech space. And that really resonated with me. And when I pitch what we do, it's essentially that in 2 words, category building. But actually, it's what we're all doing because it's so nascent. You know, earlier in the day, people said, no one was even talking about those 2 words, nature and tech. And now, what did you say? We're the sexy, we're bringing sexy back, right? So, okay. So who are we? Wow, my deck's not here. And I'm the one running the show. Okay. So who are we? The MRV Collective. We're a non-for-profit members organization. And we're built to end the nature finance gap. We believe, and this comes from our founding members, that in order to make that happen, in order to bring that massive wall of money that we all hear is waiting just to like overflow us, we need to solve a critical piece, and that is nature data. that's what the guys over here are doing. Because without data, the other side of the table is not going to come in, right? And so we are humble in being this platform to amplify the message of the people here and many of the folks here. And what's a snapshot of us in a little over a year? We are on the steering committee of the TNFD. We're co-authors of the Nature Tech Report, which we're super excited about. It's going to be launching in October. We've facilitated nearly a dozen investments already in members of our community and our ecosystem. And also, frankly, this is just the beginning of a lot more of these events. So we have one coming up at Bloom. We have another one coming up at Planet Tech in Israel, and more. So stay tuned on that front. However, what I was going to do is actually, let's see, maybe I could find this. I know this is really in action right now. Let's see if we get this done. There we go. It is here. All right. So there. You guys are so patiently waiting. Fantastic. Or asleep. All right, I'm just gonna get this done the old school way. All right, so today I'm really excited because I get to share with you the next version of MRV Collective. So until this point, we're 70+ members strong. MRV providers, academic institutions like Crowther Lab and the Technion. It's been an amazing ride. However, getting feedback from you guys from our last event and honestly on the day-to-day, having conversations with incredible corporates and financial institutions, we realize that for us to really achieve the potential of the organization and frankly, the entire sector, we have to get the corporates leveled up on education. We have to get the financial institutions more comfortable to start investing, start funding. So as MRV Collective, we are launching a new tier of membership, what we're calling anchor memberships. And it really falls on two basic pillars. So we have the community already. Pillar number 2 is the sector intelligence unit. This is our attempt to get everyone leveled up on what nature tech actually means. So we'll have biannual state of the sector reports. We'll have quarterly reports and newsletters. We'll have monthly dedicated webinars and even one-on-one dedicated office hours for our members. You come to us with challenges, you have questions, we connect you with our vast network of advisors, mentors, of practitioners. It's our job to make sure you feel comfortable enough to understand really what your challenge is or your goals are when it comes to nature, and for us together to get to the point where we get to a solution. The foundation of it all is going to be what we believe will be the most comprehensive sector map in the nature tech space. So this is covering all the various stakeholders, indigenous and frontline communities, academic institutions, buyers, investors, and of course the MRV solutions themselves, both through an actual fully interactive member directory and also a visualized entity map. There's already a prototype and many of the members of this esteemed panel are already in this, but it's not just AUM and geographic locations, it's the One Earth taxonomy. It's SDGs, it's going through the planetary boundaries, it's giving you tech stacks, the mangroves tech stack, the soil tech stack. Who's doing hardware? What's the reporting being done? Who's doing what and what's actually not being done? What are the gaps that we need to collectively fill? You'll have this intuitively, will be available to the members. The second piece of the puzzle is moving beyond intelligence. Knowledge is key, of course, but what about application? And so this is where the second piece of the puzzle for us, which is a dedicated corporate accelerator. Again, you come to us with your challenges, your goals, your opportunity. We help you refine that into specific asks. And then we reach out to our members, we reach out to the director, we reach out to our advisors and build you a short list of the ones and twos. Sorry. All right, okay. So the short list. Together, we then figure out of the short list, who do we want to invite to a curriculum? This curriculum includes about 6 months of mentorship, of guidance, getting both parts of this dance duo to do the tango. Because really, again, in conversations had on both sides of the table, the potential investors or the buyers and the startups, the problem is they speak different languages, right? A startup dies by the time a large corporate yawns. So we have to make sure that in 6 months, we are pilot ready, right? And even post-pilot implementation, when you guys do your thing, we're there to help you with post-pilot facilitation and then external communications and marketing to make sure the world knows of this happening. All this is built into the wider access to the community, the platforming, everything you're already seeing us doing. So we will be publicly launching this in Q1 of 2024. And we have been doing a lot of customer discovery. I'm seeing a lot of people I've been speaking to for the last few months. We're really excited about this, and we hope you'll join us on this journey. So I'm going to wrap it up with this. Basically, the question keeps on coming up, and the answers are usually collaboration. If you have questions, challenges, come to us. We're here to serve as a facilitator, and yeah, we're on this journey together. So that's it on me. And now to round it out,
Thanks, Gilad. Okay, we're nearly there. We're very nearly there. I think it was Megan. Did you say this was the hottest club in town? Certainly the hottest room I've ever been in, that's for sure. So Nature for Climate has its own in-house nature tech tool, and the team are here, and they said, oh, can we come up and talk at your nature tech event and tell everyone what we're doing? And I said, no, which I feel really bad about. So Patricia is going to just take 1 minute of your time, because the whole nature-based team are here in the corner, and you can come and find out more about it. So once Patricia has finished, you are free to go, but don't forget, we've got green tickets up here for anyone who wants to come to the Wheel Tapper pub around the corner. Excellent. And we can go and carry on the networking afterwards. So Patricia, over to you to close us out.
Thanks, boss. So yeah, I won't take too much of your time. So just, I think, related to a lot of the conversations that have been happening in this room, one of the things that we're trying to do as a mission for Nature for Climate is to unlock the 11 gigatons, or 1/3 of the solution that nature can provide to meet the climate and biodiversity targets. This is, of course, a super mission. It's just so hard to do. But what we're trying to put together now is the puzzle of all of that landscape of tools. How do we map out, the journey of the user, so that we can go from identifying the opportunities to the monitoring? What nature-based is going to serve is really expand on the existing science, on all of the databases that we have in terms of all of the natural climate solutions pathways available across forests, grasslands, wetlands, for protect, manage, and restore, and kind of like place it linked to enabling policies, linked to ecosystem service, linked to case studies from the ground, a little bit of storytelling also that we do, engaging with IPLCs on the ground. So we have, and of course, as the nature of Nature for Climate, we want to do that collectively, and we really want to engage with the whole community to understand where nature-based can fill any gaps, and where can we kind of like direct back to your own tools and to your own monitoring. So that'd be great if you have questions, if you want to engage. We're preparing a beta release for November, and that will be publicly available, not completely with all of the features, but we'll open for feedback and for kind of like ideas. So if you want to check it out, you can take a peek now at the desk just outside, or just leave your contact with us, subscribe, and then we'll let you know as soon as it's available. Thank you.
That's the worst, is navigating work.
Yeah. He was talking, he didn't turn it off and it stopped. But